Hello everyone and welcome to this mini Let's Play of Calm Before the Storm, a new mod for Hearts of Iron 4 that begins the game in 1933 and adds many new political mechanics to the game. Okay, so this is a special video, because it's not really a Let's Play per se, it's more of a mini Let's Play, and you'll see why in a minute. But anyways, I'm playing as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, aka the Soviet Union. Now, these are the events for... These are the intro events for the Soviet Union. Okay, so... Here's the Soviet Union, led by the Oyunz... Okay. The Oyunzaya Komunisticheskaya Partia Bolshevikov. That is the ruling party of the Soviet Union. Now let's look at the focus tree. Okay, but that's not why we're here. Now, the reason we're here is because the goal of this playthrough is to start the Soviet Civil War, or the Second Russian Civil War. Now, that doesn't happen until like 1938 or thereabouts, but there is a way to, of course, make the Second Russian Civil War happen. And that is when 1936 or thereabout rolls around, there will be a decision to start the Great Purge. Now the thing is, you don't take the decision, and that's how you start the Second Russian Civil War. So now it's 1933. So in the meantime, I might as well just start with the issue of collectivization focus. So you can see this is the focus tree. And in the meantime, I'm going to set up everything. Okay. I don't think I'm gonna recruit any new divisions, because I want the Red Army to be as weak as possible when the Second the Second Russian Civil War begins. So, okay. Let me create an agency. I guess I'll create the NKVD. Okay, did I create? Okay, let's do that again. Okay, so let me look at let's look at the generals. Okay, let's look at the roster of generals. Now, okay, many of these generals that are in this roster do not appear in the base game. Many of these generals, and the reason for that is that many of these generals in the roster were purged during the Great Purge. And for that reason, they didn't fight in the Second World War or the Great Patriotic War, because they were killed in the Great Purges. That's one of the reasons they don't appear, I guess, in the base game, because they weren't World War II generals. However, later on, you can recruit those generals who were prominent during the Great Patriotic War in this game. But you don't do that until later. I believe it's after the purges, but through decisions you can hire new generals to replace the ones you purged. And those generals are the ones from the base game, who were prominent during the Great Patriotic War. So, Sapochnikov was prominent during the Great Patriotic War, and I believe he's in the base game as well. Tukhachevsky, Budyonny, Voroshilov, they're all in the base game. I think Voroshilov's in the base game, but Tukhachevsky was purged, and in the base game you can purge him. But basically, Zhukov, Konev, all the other basically, Zhukov, Konev, and all the other like famous Red Army, all the other famous like Red Army generals during World War II, they're not here. But anyways, I'm just going to garrison these guys in Moscow for now. Now, I'm either okay. Okay. So, with the magic of editing, I will be back in just a moment. Okay, with the magic of editing, I will speed things up right to just before the Second Russian Civil War starts, and we can see how things develop. Okay, I'm back. And it is now September 1st of 1938. Over 5.5 years after the start of the game. Now, let's take a look at the decisions for the Soviet Union, and we'll see the Great Purge decisions. Now, I didn't take any of these decisions, because not taking these decisions and failing the Great Purge mission will allow the Russian, or as I should say, the Second Russian Civil War to begin. So, let us continue. This will time out in 5 days. So on September 6th, this mission will end. Or 4 days, so on September 5th, this mission will end. Okay, it's September 5th of 1938, and I failed the Great Purge. So now we just gotta wait for the Second Russian Civil War to start. Now, I have the third 5-year plan mission. We don't need to worry about that. I have some missions to send equipment to Republican Spain, which is winning the Spanish Civil War. And I have some decisions to restore order in Belarus, Central Russia, Ukraine, the Caucasus, Central Asia, and Siberia. But we don't need to worry about any of these decisions. In the meantime, let's look at the rest of the world. So Republican Spain is Democratic Socialist under President Manuel Azaña and Prime Minister Juan Negrin, and Nationalist Spain is Phalangist under José Antonio Primo de Rivera. And Germany is still the Weimar Republic, and Emil Fuchs is the president. And the Weimar Republic of Germany is under a democratic socialist government. So Emil Fuchs is the president, and the chancellor is Otto Wels. And the previous president was Edvin Bumka, and he was the president that succeeded Hindenburg in 1933. And Lithuania became fascist as Iron Wolf Lithuania under the rule of Augustinus Voldemaras. Okay. So those are the only ahistorical things to have happened in the game so far. Now, let's continue. So let me set some new research. I'm gonna do that. Okay, let's continue. And if there's anything else historical that happened... okay. If there's anything else ahistorical that happened in the game, for example, like Alexandros Zymis still being president of Greece, even though he was dead by this point, it's just because content for that country hasn't been added in yet. Like, content for Greece hasn't been added in yet. Like, Eleftherios Venizelos. Okay, it's actually Nikolaos Danglis. He's shown as the head of government. Well, anyway, the point still stands. Countries that don't have content are still going to show their starting leaders as leaders, even if they resigned or, you know, weren't in government anymore, or weren't in office anymore, or were dead. At that point in history in real life. And also, of course, Austria was never Anschlussed by Germany, so they still exist. Under the Austro-fascist Heimat Bloc. Okay, so anything else ahistorical that happens is just the result of, for the most part, just the result of that country not having content yet and still having the leader it had at the start of the game. However, I've noticed that the Latin American countries have changed their leaders pretty much historically. Because all the leaders, as far as I know, all the historical leaders of Latin America from 1933 to 1948 are in this game. And same goes for the Governor Generals of the British Dominions. They change too, according to who served in that office historically. Anyways, let's go back to the Soviet Union. The Second Russian Civil War should start soon. We just need to be patient. Okay, here we go. Comrade Stalin's assassination. The Kremlin is in a panic. Comrade Stalin's secretary, Alexander Pogrebyshev, went into the great leader's office after the latter had failed to respond to some knocks and found him dead at his table. Pogrebyshev and the visiting Marshal Voroshilov called the militia, the military specialist, and the NKVD without haste. Comrade Stalin was hunched over at his desk with a hole in his head and a gun on the floor. He had bled profusely, but preliminary estimates suggest he died instantly and early in the morning. According to Comrade Pogrebyshev, Voroshilov was the first appointment of the day, and the guards confirmed that Comrade Pogrebyshev had entered the Kremlin after the estimated time of death. However, Comrade Beria notes that Pogrebyshev did not see the late General Secretary in his office as he came into work. It was then decided that the NKVD would, of course, take charge of the investigation, and Comrade Pogrebyshev, the guards, and even some of the cleaning crew were arrested as possible suspects. The news was not only printed and broadcast some hours later after it was decided that... Okay. The news was only printed and broadcast some hours later after it was decided that President Mikhail Kalinin, head of the Cadres Directorate, Georgy Malenkov, and party darling Nikolai Bukharin would form a troika that would lead the government until a new general secretary can be chosen. Their first act was to announce a week of mourning and the schedule for Comrade Stalin's funeral. There would be grand shows of grief, spectacular parades, everything else that would impress foreign journalists. How could nobody notice this earlier? Okay. It's the 28th of September, or September 28th, 1938, and Stalin is dead. And Mikhail Kalinin is now the leader of the Soviet Union and of the Troika. So now a new focus tree will pop up. Well, I can't do the 5-year plan anymore, so I can bypass this Stalin is dead focus, and I can do stay popular. I'll do that focus. Okay, let's continue. Okay, the French Republic has joined the Allies. Interesting. Now I wonder if Germany will join the Allies, and I also should point out that I'm pretty sure the Germany is currently led by the Sozialistische Demokratische Party Deutschlands, the Social Democratic Party of Germany. Okay, let's go back to the map view, the regular map view, and let us wait. Time of uncertainty. Okay. The great leader has died. Though his 4-day funeral was majestic, a wave of uncertainty has gripped the nation. We were in this situation 15 years ago when Lenin died, but this feels very different. Back then the nation was taken by optimistic predictions of a socialist future, but reactions this time are mixed. Some are truly saddened by Comrade Stalin's death, and no matter who replaced him, a golden age has come and gone. Others feel that now can be a time for change, whether for better or for worse. Yet many want no truck with the situation at all, certain that nothing fundamentally will change. For the bureaucracy, the situation is even more unsure. To their credit, the bureaucrats are doing their best to keep order, reassure the populace, and keep any bribes hidden. However, there has been a noticeable level of discontent in the party, as far-off party sections and committees have slowly begun to pursue a more independent policy, on occasion coming into conflict with Moscow. Moscow itself has shown signs of instability, despite the immense effort undertaken to keep Moscow the same. The capital has reacted the same way as the rest of the nation. It is clear that our position will be quite uncertain for the time being. Something rotten is in the city of Moscow. Okay, Republican Spain, now the Spanish Republic, has won the Spanish Civil War. So maybe they'll join the Allies too. I don't know. Okay, stay popular is finished. Let me do keep order. Protests in Ukraine. For the last several weeks, unrest in the Ukrainian countryside has been slowly growing. Our collectivization campaigns of the 20s and 30s had taken a huge toll on the people, who are starting to show further signs of dissatisfaction. Organized protests have started in the streets of Kiev, Odessa, and Dnipropetrovsk. Largely disillusioned students, these protesters have demanded justice for the people, the disbanding of the NKVD, and reform or replacement of the Bolshevik system. These protests are very small, as the biggest only numbers about 75 people in Kiev. However, the militia has managed to arrest most of them, and the situation is now under control. These students should know better. Okay, now things are starting to come to a head, and they should climax soon. Protest in Tbilisi. Georgia, much like Ukraine, is a historical hotbed of anti-Soviet activity. In 1924, a rebellion attempted to shake off our rule, and it seems these memories have not died. News of the Ukrainian protests have clearly reached Georgia, as about 1,200 dissidents, including students, workers, and even a bureaucrat or two, converged on the House of Government building and protested for about 8 hours before the police were able to disperse them. Smaller protests also took place in Batumi and Kutaisi. Internal reports show that protesters who resisted arrest, and even a few that did not, were beaten quite harshly by the authorities. Of course, this will never be printed. Once news of this protest spread through Georgia, it elicited curious responses from the South Ossetian and Abkhazian ASSRs, part of the Georgian SSR. In an apparently coordinated maneuver, both regions' parties have issued statements separate from their region. Their regions from Georgia. That's a little bit of a typo, I guess. Anyways, both groups wish for their ASSRs to become part of the RSFSR rather than remain Georgian. If anything, it is proof that our Korenizatsiya strategy had worked. we must be very careful. Okay, so we continue to lose stability. Okay, research this. Military loyalty. During this period of confusion, the eastern regions of the USSR have begun to act more and more independently. In this vein, the eastern military districts, most notably the Far East, governed by Vasily Blucher, have generally stopped listening to Moscow and only send back paltry reports. It is clear that the Red Army has more or less decided that the political leadership cannot decisively govern in a period of clear instability, and have thus decided to follow their own orders. Is that legal? Okay, so now I'm going to go with Legacy of the Revolution. Unrest in the South. Though most of the people's lives have gone back to normal, the general feeling of uncertainty has devolved into fear. After the protests in Ukraine and Georgia, it seems as though the people are even more encouraged to speak out against the government. Southern Russia has recently seen a growing wave of unrest, especially since that region was devastated by collectivization. In a rare break from Moscow, the Stalingrad City Committee of the VKPB, Gorkom Stalingrad, has approved a series of radical new measures meant to placate the populace. These measures include greater spending on housing, factory construction, and food distribution. What baffles observers is that Gorkom Stalingrad has announced these changes when it knows full well it can neither pay for them on its own nor get the money from any upper levels. These announcements are thus entirely symbolic. Nevertheless, Moscow hardliners are furious at the idea of a Russian Gorkom acting independently of the Central Committee. How can this be tolerated? Okay, I gained some stability but lost some political power. Okay, now I'm going to do a new propaganda campaign. Okay, and I should also point out that the Republic of China and the Empire of Japan are at war in the Second Sino-Japanese War. And it seems to be a stalemate for the most part. So China has their own faction, the Chinese United Front, made up of all the different warlord states. And of course there's Japan and their alliance, their faction, the Co-Prosperity Sphere, or the Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere. And that includes the Japanese puppet states of Manchuria and the Mongol military government. Okay. Moscow nights. It was a crisp spring night in Moscow. A young student was taking the trolleybus home from university. He looked out onto the street and saw what everyone else saw. People trying to do their best in the circumstances they were given. Tomorrow he was to go to a Komissol meeting and listen to political reports, but his heart wasn't in it. The young man had never cared for political meetings anyways. He just wanted to be an engineer. Likely, he had begun to think that Stalin's death had opened up the opportunity for real change. He understood that the state had given him an education and a future place of work, but to him it appeared that the Central Committee were living like kings while the common people were living in shambles. He thought perhaps it was time for the people's voice to be heard. The man sitting on the other end of the trolleybus could not have felt differently from our first subject. This man was a Moscow worker, and he too had a party meeting the next day. Unlike the engineering student, the worker was very much looking forward to his political meeting. Born into a poor family, he had barely reached adulthood when the first 5-year plan had begun, and he deeply believed the only reason he was still alive was the Bolsheviks. Comrade Stalin's party had provided him with a basic education, a factory to work in, and a communal apartment. He deeply detested the protesters, as his workplace comrades would attest. He also hated the Troika, branding them as bourgeois and ineffectual. In his anger, the man began to think that revenge would come soon. The river moves and does not move. Okay. Okay, the fates of Zinoviev and Kamenev. Georgy Zinoviev and Lev Kamenev, members of the First Troika and former associates of Lenin, were imprisoned in 1934 after being forced to admit moral complicity in the killing of Sergei Kirov. This finished a power struggle between Zinoviev and Stalin that had gone on since the formation of the First Troika. Originally siding with Stalin over Trotsky, they had begun to drift away from the late General Secretary and had been exiled to the Urals after reading Demian Royatin's anti-Stalinist platform. Likely there has been some talk in the Central Committee of bringing the pair back to Moscow as a show of clemency. They would be put under surveillance, of course, but such a move would show the people that we are a merciful government, capable of reconciling with the opposition. It will also show that we are loyal to Lenin's platform instead of being purely the cult of Stalin. Should we let them out or allow them to rot in prison? We shall welcome them back. Okay. Hang on. I'm gonna go with find a scapegoat. Okay, it's a new year, 1939. Soon, later during this year, the Civil War should break out. Okay. I'm gonna pick deploy the militia. I'll go with this focus. Massacre in Kiev. Every few days, the cycle repeats. Protesters amass in front of party committee offices and pressure for change until the police disperse them. However, these protests continue to grow each time, to the point where the military now guards local squares. Yesterday's protest in Kiev numbered nearly 12,000 people and continued for over 12 hours, from dawn into the night, as the police were unsure of what to do. However, as a few soldiers tried to draw away and arrest a group of protesters, the students began resisting, as has become common practice for the dissidents. And as has become common practice for the military and police, they began beating the protesters. Of course, other protesters reacted negatively, and the crowd appeared to pulse with activity. Some moved to help their colleagues, others moved towards the Verkhovna Rada building. It was this latter group that spooked the soldiers as shots rang out over the square. As other soldiers began joining in, the entire battle lasted 7 minutes until a second group of soldiers could intervene. This had also scared the militia, who began attacking protesters as well, who responded in kind. When the dust settled, 27 people had died and another 443 had been wounded. Though Pravda and Izvestia will claim this to be an insurrection, we cannot keep people in the dark much longer. We are doomed. Okay, we lost popularity. We lost some stability and popularity in Leninism. And yeah, that's basically what we lost. Okay, the Kiev riot. The killing of Ukrainian protesters did not go over well with the Kievans. Nearly immediately, a riot began on the western side. The killing of Ukrainian protesters did not go over well with the Kievans. Nearly immediately, a riot began on the western side, left bank of the Dnieper, of the city, particularly near the capital district. Throughout the night and into the early morning, shops were burned, goods were looted, and authorities were attacked. Particularly at risk of personal attack were the Jewish population. If they themselves were uninjured, stories ran that they would more than likely have been targeted by rioters who blamed minorities for Bolshevik rule. All we could do at this point was watch. The Red Army had been pulled back to prevent further incidents. Though soldiers had been sent to other Ukrainian cities for security. Until dawn, Kiev was in anarchy and chaos reigned. All we can do now is put out the fires and count the dead. The potential political ramifications of this are stunning. Most in Moscow do not even want to think that far ahead. We should prepare for the worst. Okay. I just want to see something, so I'm gonna load this autosave. Okay, what I want to see is I want to see if I click off the event on the same day it appears, will the other event appear sooner? So let's go. Okay, I'm going to go with another focus. Okay, massacre in Kiev, February 8th. We are doomed. We already read that. I'm going to go with deploy the militia again. Okay, the Kiev riot. We should prepare for the worst. Okay. So to speed this up, I'll just pause the game and just read the events and then unpause. Restless Ukraine. The Kiev massacre and the subsequent riot have only served to incense the Ukrainians. The cities have seen new protests and small acts of rioting and vandalism. The countryside and small towns have essentially rejected Bolshevik rule, on some occasions taking the local authorities captive and arming themselves if possible. There have even been rumors of gunfights or murders, but these are not yet possible to prove. Besides the popularity of this movement, what worries Moscow most is their drive to organize. These rebels draw support from nearly all strata of Soviet society. Peasants, workers, students, technical specialists, and even some bureaucrats have turned on us. This has allowed the rebels to establish communications between each other and are coordinating their movements. While they have not yet taken over key industrial or political areas, they could do so at any moment. Communications from loyal stations are sparse, and transport in or out has nearly stopped. It seems that our only option is to send the Red Army to restore order town by town. The Red Army shall be victorious. Or not. The Tbilisi takeover. The Georgians have apparently been watching the chaos in Ukraine closely. Yesterday, a contingent of protesters, too many to count, had marched on the House of Government building in Tbilisi with the intention of entering it and declaring the end of Soviet power in Georgia. At least that is what their signs implied. While the soldiers had been told that the events in Kiev were an insurrection, many thought differently, and their commanders and the political leadership knew exactly what had happened. To avoid a similar situation, the Red Army retreated to the doors of the building and commanded the protesters to stand down. The dissidents stopped in front of the building, and the two sides remained in an impasse for 3 hours, screaming at each other until the protesters finally retreated, not wishing to spark a riot. Even though this obvious coup had failed, the rebels still control a large portion of Tbilisi. Though they have been trying to organize like the Ukrainians, Georgia's lack of infrastructure and rural nature means that they have had very little luck outside of the capital. This has not stopped the Tbilisians from creating a Georgian People's Assembly, which sort of acts as a council for the rebels. We fight on two fronts. Okay. Things are starting to climax. Okay, now, the Civil War has begun. Revolt in Stalingrad. Stalingrad and southern Russia had remained a hotbed of dissident activity, despite attempts to win the people over by Gorkom Stalingrad. Employment and housing programs announced several months ago had failed to bring fruit, and this deeply alienated the people. Following Tbilisi's example, thousands of Stalingraders marched on the Gorkom offices. Protesters confronted the Red Army soldiers with rage in their eyes, knowing, whether consciously or subconsciously, that they had nothing to lose. The party secretary for the city tried talking to them, but to no avail. The Red Army captain overseeing the office's defense apparently understood what the situation was building towards and ordered the soldiers to stand down. The protesters entered the building and, using whatever weapons they had, arrested and disarmed the security guards, eventually occupying the entire building. On the steps of the building, a group of protesters had read out their declaration. The Bolshevik dictatorship was responsible for the oppression of the people, the death of millions, and the Troika had failed to address any of these issues. Therefore, the Bolsheviks had been overthrown in Zaratizhzhin, not Stalingrad, and declared a provisional People's Council with the primary intention of taking over from the communists. The protesters ended on a call for the Red Army to join the provisional government. Therefore, the Bolsheviks had been overthrown in Zaratizhzhin, not Stalingrad, and declared a provisional People's Council with the primary intention of taking over from the communists. The protesters ended on a call for the Red Army to join the provisional government and called on Moscow to surrender peacefully. This speech was also broadcast throughout the region, encouraging several towns and cities to attempt the same process. Though we are obviously not going to surrender, many soldiers in the region have deserted the Red Army and defected to the side of these counter-revolutionary pigs, in some cases helping the dissidents take power. It is clear that we have a new war on our hands. A major cause for concern in Moscow is the defection of General Andrei Andreevich Vlasov. A defecting high-ranking general is quite alarming, but he has declared himself to be the ideologue of the movement. He has immediately declared the creation of a Committee for the Liberation of the Peoples of Russia, or KONAD, or KONAD. Though many dissidents are wary of working with somebody complicit in the purges, these obvious fascists clearly have no intention of doing away with him. We must crush the traitors. Hooray for the council. Down with Bolshevism. So I'm going to save right here. I might try winning the Soviet Civil War or the Second Russian Civil War as the Soviet Union later. For now, I'm going to go with hooray for the council, down with Bolshevism. Okay. Let's go.